Hello and welcome to This Sporting Planet, your global view of sport. Now, normally I'm in Singapore, but today from London, I'm Edward Russell.
Also in London, I'm Natalie Sawyer.
And from the USA, I'm Todd Harris.
Today we're wrapping up our review of 2024 with a round-the-world trip that will take in basketball, baseball, horse racing, boxing, cricket and tennis. So strap yourselves in.
So we actually recorded most of this podcast a couple of days ago, and we'll bring you that in a little bit. But first we had to bring the gang back together because over the weekend we had a big fight that we need to react to that took place in Saudi Arabia. It saw a rematch for the unified heavyweight world titles between Oleksandr Usyk and Tyson Fury after their titanic battle back in May, which saw the Ukrainian emerge victorious that time around. And then on Saturday, Usyk secured another close points victory over the British fighter, with all three judges scoring it the way of 116 to 112. The man now who has an undefeated record of 23 professional wins. It was yet again another incredible performance by Oleksandr Usyk, Todd, who just has this incredible ice cold demeanor. You had that 11-minute stare down just a few days before in their pre-fight press conference, and he doesn't seem to get riled by anything, and it was shown in the ring once more.
Oh, no question, Natalie. I think the thing that we're all just missing, the elephant in the room, let's be honest, $100 million to each fighter. I will get in there and let Tyson Fury knock my block off. $100 million. No, but it's all the shenanigans that went on before. I mean, I think it was funny. The Usyk camp was saying, hey, we need Fury to trim that beard down a little bit. And then that carried into it. But from my perspective, I don't even think it was that close. I think Usyk definitely was the better fighter. I think he outpointed him. I think his boxing prowess just showed. And you look at the size difference. I mean, what are we talking about? 6 inches in height and reach. Weight was 50 pounds more going the way of Fury. So I think maybe this chapter has changed. I know a lot of my friends were saying, oh, we're going to see a Tyson Fury and Usyk part 3. And I just don't know if there's an appetite for that. I know in the States, a lot of this fight got lost because there was so much going on in the Americas with the college football playoff being launched. NFL was getting close to playoff time. NHL, NBA basketball. So it was in the mix, I will say that, but it definitely wasn't a top 3 story. But Edward, I don't know, from your perspective, how did it play in your part of the world?
Yeah, I mean, it was a weird one, wasn't it? Because it didn't seem to be that many people in the arena either. It was about 27,000, I think. So it was very much a fight designed for pay-per-view rather than those who were coming down to watch us.
But there were some big names there.
Garden kind of fight. Well, that is a good point. Yes. Also, of course, that very much helped the social media clips that were going around. Some celebrities, as you mentioned, the likes of Jason Statham, Neymar, Lennox Lewis, Vladimir Klitschko, of course, when it comes to boxing and fighting, Oscar De La Hoya as well. It was good timing, actually, in Asia, which I can't say for a lot of worldwide events. But I think I mentioned this on a previous podcast. It doesn't resonate boxing as much as MMA does because that has a lot more kind of Asian fighting elements in it. It was 6:45 o'clock in Singapore, 9:45 in the morning in Australia. And of course, there was an Australian on the undercard as well in Dempsey McKean. Perhaps we'll get onto that later in terms of future contenders as well. But yeah, an interesting fight. Fury wasn't very happy with the result, though, was he, Nat?
No, he wasn't. He was not happy with the scoring at all. He thought it was much closer, and obviously he himself thought he'd won the fight. Like you, Todd, I sort of are on the side of the judges in the sense that I do think Oleksandr Usyk was the deserved winner. Perhaps some of the scorecards, you could argue, might have been a little bit closer. But all in all, I mean, Usyk has just delivered yet another masterclass because what he does is he seems to lull his opponents in because Tyson Fury, it kind of mirrored the first. Tyson Fury started off well, but you get to around the 6th round mark and that's when Usyk comes to the fore. That's when he sort of, as I say, lulls in his opponent. And he just delivers those blows that are important to get those judges' marks. So, yeah, I think Fury, when you're talking about what next, I think no doubt, of course, Fury will want another rematch. He'll want that opportunity to become the best of the best. But does Usyk need it? He's proven it now twice that he can beat Fury. And if I was Usyk, I would just be sitting back and enjoying myself and you know, being amongst my family, being able to chill for a bit because we know what it's like being a boxer. You've got so much camp's time that you've got to concentrate on. So, you know, I definitely think if I was Usyk, I would just wait and see what happens amongst the rest of the heavyweights to see who his next opponent could be. I imagine he'll want to take on the IBF world champion, who currently is Daniel Dubois, but he's going to take on Joseph Parker in February. And then, of course, he might want to then take on that winner to become once more the unified heavyweight world champion, Todd.
I think that's the key, is the unified world title, and I think that's what people will wait for. Will Tyson Fury want another go at him? Absolutely, especially with that payday. But I think, Nat, to your point, I think Tyson Fury showed a penchant for, I don't want to say lack of cardio, but you drag him into the deep end of a championship fight, and I think that's where he really struggles. Is he still a great fighter? Yeah, absolutely. And is he still a draw? Yes. But I think the consumer's appetite to do a pay-per-view or to even watch a fight, again, I think it's just going to play out the same way, even with Fury's size advantage, reach advantage, and all that. I just don't know if it's in the cards. And I think what you said, Natalie, was exactly right. I think if you're Usyk, you're in what we call the catbird seat. He can sit back now and pick and choose what he wants. He doesn't have to take hey, I beat you twice. What do you want me to do? He's going to look and see what's the best for him. And I think the best thing for boxing would obviously be unifying it all. And I think that's what people would like to see.
Yeah, of course, Dubois did challenge Usyk to a rematch in the ring after the fight, didn't he?
Yeah.
And it seemed to be,
did.
well, of course he did, yeah. But he wants revenge, doesn't he? It was 2023 when he lost to the Ukrainian, and that was marred by what some seem to think was a pretty tight call and a low blow. So I think they'll be watching that 22nd of Feb fight between Dubois and Parker and seeing who wins that one. And then I think that'll have a huge bearing on who fights Usyk next, if Usyk decides to fight again. But then, of course, for Fury, are we going to get now that all-British battle that we seem to have been waiting for years and years and years between himself and Anthony Joshua? I don't know if it kind of helps now that they're both kind of licking their wounds, both Joshua and Fury. They both lost titles recently. Perhaps it'll be a bit easier to have that fight now.
I think people will watch it. I mean, I think they're watching, especially that fight, the all-British fight. I think people would definitely watch that. Would it be a huge draw and an impact on the sport? I don't think so. But yes, people will watch.
Yeah, I think you're right, Todd. I think there's no real obstacles now for AJ Fury to not happen, because in the past it might have been because, well, Fury's won a title, so he wants to take on another title holder to see if he can win another belt. And it just always seemed they were never going to make their diaries work. But yet it feels like now both have a point to prove, because they both lost their most recent fights, with Joshua losing to Dubois, and then, of course, as we've just been speaking, Fury losing to Usyk. So in terms of an all-British bout, it is what everyone wants to see, although slightly it might have lost its allure that it might once had a few years ago, for sure. But what we can say about what we saw in Saudi Arabia is that Fury and Usyk, I think, have really helped to transform the heavyweight division once more, because I think a lot of question marks were being raised about the heavyweight division, because we weren't seeing the big fights anymore. We were kind of seeing, as I say, them sort of skirting around who they were going to fight, and we were seeing MMA fighters come into the ring. And I know actually Francis Ngannou did really well against AJ and against Fury as well, but they weren't the fights people wanted to see. We wanted to actually see Fury against AJ a long time ago. So what we've seen now with this huge fight with Usyk and Fury is that they've brought back the heavyweight division to the pinnacle of boxing, I feel.
Two questions for you guys. And the first one, was it a Christmas gift? I don't think so. And I think we talked about the judging in this last fight. And the second question I have for both of you is it boxing in a good place? I mean, Edward talked about how MMA has such a bigger draw now in Southeast Asia and his part of the world, Oceania, with the Muay Thai and that kind of influence. But do you guys think boxing is back, and you're not old enough to remember the glory days, as I call them, with Tyson and Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray Leonard, and with boxing was just a must-see thing? Has it been watered down? So first of all, we'll start with the Christmas gift. Who thinks it was a Christmas gift, and who thinks it was legit? I think it was a legit call. I think Usyk won the fight fair and square.
Yeah, I think so too. I think Fury was kind of required to complain a little bit, wasn't he? Because he's not a kind of man to graciously accept defeat. But yeah, I think the result was a right one. In terms of where does boxing go from here? I mean, it is sad we do get the AJ Fury fight, that it does seem like it wouldn't have the cachet that it would have had a few years ago. Not to say that the ship has sailed. I think going back to Todd's favorite fight ever, the Mike Tyson-Jake Paul one, if 60 million people tuned in for that, then, even past their prime versions of Fury and Joshua will definitely get a lot of bums on seats and a lot of eyeballs on the match, especially because they really don't like each other, or so it seems. And AJ is normally quite a modest man, a lot of humility, doesn't really get drawn into arguments, but he seems to be really annoyed by Fury when they meet.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Probably because they want to be the best of the best in Britain, certainly, and then the best and the best in the world. And unfortunately, I don't think AJ is ever going to get back to being in contention to being the best of the best when it comes to the world heavyweights. But I agree with you both. It was certainly not a Christmas gift for Usyk. I think Usyk was the better fighter at the end of the day because he repeated what he did in the first, exactly the same. I don't think the fight lived up to the hype like the first one did, but I think the first one was the OG because it was the OG, and also because they had 4 belts on the line for that one, whereas we only had 3 this time around because Usyk, of course, had to give up his IBF title when he didn't take up that mandatory challenger that the IBF division wanted him to face because he wanted to face Fury once more. So, yeah, definitely not a Christmas gift. And what next? Well, I'm sure Fury will be desperate for a trilogy, but I just don't see the need for it from an Usyk perspective. What was interesting as well, I'm listening in to reaction from that fight in Saudi Arabia. The former world lightweight champion Anthony Crolla was saying if he was Usyk, he might have actually said, put the gloves in the ring, call it a day, because you've done everything you need to do in boxing. Because let's not forget, he was a cruiserweight world champion too. He said he's going to be living in immortality when it comes to the boxing world as well because of everything he's done. So why not just hang your boxing gloves up and walk out with your head held high? And maybe that's another thing for Usyk to consider. Although he has also teased that he could move back down to the cruiserweight division as well. So we have to wait to see what Usyk's going to do. But he is a man who has that luxury to do whatever he wants.
So not a Christmas gift for Usyk, but definitely a lump of coal for Fury because he didn't even do post-match fight interviews.
No.
He just shut it down and walked off.
Grinch,
And
Todd. The Grinch.
full Grinch, full Grinch.
Well, will we see Usyk and Fury back in the ring together or individually? We'll have to wait and see, watch this space. But for now, that is Fury Usyk tied up. We're going to turn our attention now to the final 3 months of 2024 as a whole, looking back on how the final sporting stories of the year played out.
Well, guys, I'd like to start in the Americas if we could, because there are some huge battles towards the end of the calendar year that we need to talk about, starting, of course, with Major League Baseball and the World Series. And it was an absolute classic. Broadcaster network's dream. You've got the Los Angeles Dodgers on one coast, West Coast, going up against the New York Yankees on the other coast. 2 storied programs, but it was, I know, spoiler alert, the Dodgers that would go on to win this series. It was the best of 7. The Dodgers won it 4-1. But Freddie Freeman, everyone was talking about Shohei Ohtani, Aaron Judge for the Yankees, the big names. It was a guy named Freddie Freeman, first baseman for the Los Angeles Dodgers, that really stole the show to open things up. The Dodgers were trailing. Remember, they play 9 innings in baseball. They were trailing, and he comes up in extra innings in the 10th inning and hits a grand slam. What's a grand slam? The base is loaded with Dodgers, and he gets up and knocks it out of the park to give them 4 runs. They would win that game 6-3, really set the tone. But Shohei Ohtani is a difference maker, not only in the U.S., but in Japan as well. And it was just impressive how big of an impact he would have, not only on these World Series, but on the season as a whole. And to find out a little bit more about Shohei Ohtani, I caught up with Japanese journalist Tomoya Shimura, who's actually written books about the player. And here's our conversation.
Shohei Ohtani is almost like a godlike figure in Japan now. So he is, when I try to explain to Americans, he is like the president of the United States, probably like Donald Trump's, recognition, plus Taylor Swift's, pop, vibe or popularity,
With Michael
and
Jordan's athletic ability.
with Michael Jordan's, athletic ability, correct. And, he probably has close to 100% recognition rate in Japan.
Yeah.
People wake up early to watch his games, and it's across the age group, different age groups, from kids to even like 100-year-old, grandparents,
Right.
seniors. They all knew Otani, and especially the older age group in Japan, they follow his every move because they watch a lot of TV. People in their 60s, 70s. My mother-in-law, for example, she's in her 70s, and she watches a lot of TV at home, and she Otani is constantly on TV from morning news to I don't know, gossip shows during the day, and then in the evening news. Even the days he's not even playing games, he's still on TV and commercials. So he's everywhere in Japan.
He obviously is the most valuable player. The Dodgers getting him was huge. Again, remind our fans that aren't American baseball players. He originally went to Anaheim Angels, which is just 45 minutes down the road, closer to where you live in Irvine, California. And now he's with the Dodgers. And this year in the World Series, you couldn't think of a better matchup. This is the dream matchup. This is the Dodgers versus the Yankee. This is New York versus LA. This is East Coast versus West Coast. And talk about the amount of stars, not only on the Yankees team with Judge and Soto, but the Dodgers team is absolutely loaded with Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts, and of course Shohei Ohtani.
Yes, I mean, when I saw the World Series matchup, the Yankees, the Dodgers, it couldn't have been better for baseball. I mean, and it happened on this first year that Shohei Ohtani was on the Dodgers, and he, accomplished 50-50. I mean, it's a dream scenario for baseball. I mean, baseball fans, and then obviously for MLB. I, I mean, it couldn't be better for business. It couldn't be better for fan experience. And I have a feeling that this could, revitalize the popularity of baseball in this country, in the United States.
If it revitalizes the popular baseball in the United States, at what cost though? Is this going to create a drain on Japanese baseball with all the players? Because there's already been a couple other pitchers that have come over as well. There's more talent in Japan that's coming over. Is this going to hurt Japanese baseball? Because it is hugely popular.
I think it's not going to hurt baseball in Japan, but I think it's going to hurt Nippon Professional Baseball, which is the equivalent of MLB, because they're starting to lose all their best players, even from an early age, because Roki Sasaki, who Dodgers might land. He's only 23, I think, and and he's going to come over to the US. So it's not good for the league, but for baseball in Japan, I think it's a good thing, because now people are paying a lot more attention to baseball, because people consider playing in the United States as the as the highest achievement, and there are a lot of Japanese players who are actually succeeding here. Yamamoto, Otani, and Roki's going to be a huge. It's going to be a lot. Going to be popular here. So people are paying a lot more attention to baseball thanks to Otani, and young kids are gonna want to be Otani. So and they're gonna want to play baseball. So and baseball in Japan was also seen as kind of the middle-aged, men's sport. But now it's considered a little more pop, and people are wearing major league caps. So I think it's good for baseball in general. I don't know how that's gonna, how the league's popularity is going to be affected by it. But I think in the long run, I think it's great for the sport.
What do you think this World Series meant to his career going forward? I mean, you face off in the biggest, obviously the biggest baseball stage in the world with the Yankees, and the way the Dodgers played and the way they came back, and Freddie Freeman kind of stole the show. But Shohei Ohtani, I mean, he's just always there. He's like a great white shark lurking. You can never count him out. And whenever he steps up the plate, it's must see TV.
Yes, well, this World Series, I mean, I didn't think it was come the first year, to be honest, like, playing against the Yankees, but he's, and then accomplishing 50-50 along the way. But I
Yes.
think one thing that kept him, people were always talking about him, wait, is he the greatest player of all time? But with that conversation always comes, hey, how many rings have you won? And, and that was the thing with Otani. He had never played in the playoffs with the Angels. So, having that ring gives him that, opens up that conversation of, hey, and I've already seen it. My fellow sports writers are saying he's probably the greatest player of all time, especially if he's able to continue playing two-way for like 2 or 3 more years, and I think is, in that conversation. So I think this World Series win was huge. I think what's left for him is actually creating those moments that, that like Michael Jordan, how he had that 1998, NBA Finals Game 6, the moment of the last shot. I think Otani needs to have that moment to be in that same league with, someone like Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods, that people remember forever, as part of the history, and that, people, people in this country, compared to other places, I think even, I think people care a lot about postseason, what they do in postseason, especially the championship game. So if Otani can, be a two-way player in the postseason, show what he did in the World Baseball Classic in 2023, when he was, hitting, and then he struck out Mike Trout in the ninth inning. he needs that kind of, I think people are um want that kind of moment for him in the World Series. And he, if you're thinking, if there's someone who can do that in that big moment, I think Otani's the one.
So really an interesting interview, Edward. Shohei Ohtani, I kind of have to put him on that level, and hasn't won as much, but I have to put him on that level of a Ronaldo or a Messi to the world of football or soccer that he is in baseball, because he's bringing multiple countries to the table.
Absolutely, yeah. He is an icon in this part of the world. I mean, let's start kind of small scale first. Oshu, where he grew up. It's a town that's long been known for beef and ironwork. It's now famous for Shohei. Watch parties were organized at community centers all around during the World Series, and everyone was waving these sticks, hailing Ohtani as the pride of Oshu City. And despite the inconvenient timing, which I continue to bring up in every episode, but it is true, it is hard watching European and American sports here in Asia. The games averaged 15.9 million viewers in Japan over the course of the World Series. That's about 12% of the country's population. And then those who weren't content on watching on the other side of the world, they came to the US, and Japanese supporters bought more tickets for the World Series than from any other country outside of North America. Not just in Japan, when the Dodgers and the San Diego Padres opened the MLB season with 2 games in Seoul. Yep, all eyes on Shohei. And this is, of course, Korea, right? This is a country that doesn't necessarily like supporting Japanese athletes, Japanese stars, Japanese bands, because they have been bitter rivals for so long, but they will make an exception for Shohei. And then outside of Japan and South Korea, his popularity also extends to Taiwan, which also has its own professional baseball league. In fact, the buyer of his 50-50 home run ball, which sold for $4.4 million at auction, was revealed to be the Taiwanese investment firm UC Capital, which is a tenant of Taipei 101, which at one point was the tallest building in the world. It's still one of the tallest buildings in Asia. That ball, the 50-50 ball, now on public display behind a glass case and with lots of security, of course, at Taipei 101 until March the 2nd, 2025. So if you want to see it, you got to head to Taipei.
Ed, I'm sure you put a bid on that ball, right?
Yeah, $1. It didn't last very long.
Do you know, this story is fascinating because I don't think baseball has that reach yet over here in England. I don't want to speak for the whole of Europe, but obviously there are some, we've seen some matches staged over here. Maybe they've been a bit slow on the uptake, unlike with the NFL, for example, who are regulars over here. But I think the Ohtani sort of story is fascinating in that I think we've seen on social media some of the humility that he's brought to the sport, the respect that he's brought to the sport, and maybe that's part of the Japanese culture that he's brought over. That we've seen, but I don't necessarily think baseball, as of yet, has gripped everyone over here. But having said that, you look at the matches that have been played over here, which I think we've had it 3 times, all at the London Stadium, all getting near to capacity. So it's coming, and we might well see it more regularly coming over here, seeing these Major League Baseball International Series matches being staged here. But it's fascinating to hear all about his story. I just don't think we have quite got it yet over here. Because actually, one of the barometers to know whether or not a sport grips a nation, especially here in England, is if you look at the BBC Sport website, if you click on more as an option to find all the different sports, baseball isn't on there yet. Now, American football is, but baseball isn't there yet. So that's why it's so fascinating to hear about it, because I don't think everyone will have heard about his story and everything that happened with the, of course, the World Series as well.
I think you make a good point, Natalie. I was one of the folks that traveled to London Stadium this summer and saw the New York Mets and the Philadelphia Phillies play out there, and it was sold out. It was a packed house for 2 days, but I think a lot of those were Americans that wanted to come over and enjoy some of the lovely British summer weather.
You mentioned his humility as well, Natalie, and that is one of the reasons why he has been so successful, because he has a really, I mean, apart from obviously what happened with his translator, a really clean, squeaky clean image. And that's obviously made him such a huge asset to all these brands who signed multi-million-dollar deals with him. Of course, his tag as the most expensive baseball player in the world didn't last too long, Todd.
Unbelievable.
Ohtani's, I guess, has been good value for the money. What do you make about Juan Soto looking forward?
Well, you throw out that kind of money, and we're talking $765 million spaced over, 15 years. And just doing a deep dive and crunching the numbers, the at bat and the per game numbers are just astronomical. I mean, let's be honest, is he going to be playing for the New York Mets in 15 years? Probably not, but that's investing a lot of money and doing a big splash, because it's one of those things where if you put something like that, if you put a product like that out there, especially in America, that draws eyeballs, people will come and they'll join and they'll want to follow and they'll want to see it, whether it's a car wreck that you can't look away from, or whether it's just an amazing performance. Now, Juan Soto might be one of the best hitters, no question about it, in Major League Baseball right now, but is he worth that kind of money? I think time will tell, certainly for the Mets. But they had to make a big splash sharing a town with the New York Yankees. They had to do something, and they went over and they picked their pockets.
So is he the highest paid of any sports star in America now?
I think that's the largest athletic sports contract in the history of sport right now, is that. And we're talking $750 million for one player. And there's some teams that play in MLB that their whole payroll doesn't even come close to what they're going to pay Juan Soto, or in the same ballpark. So it's the haves and the have-nots. We talk about big market teams like the New Yorks, Los Angeleses, the Chicagos, compared to the smaller market teams like the Pittsburghs, the Oakland, now Las Vegas teams that just don't have the same money, the same revenue to compete for it, and the owners. But I think it was interesting this year. You had the two Goliaths going toe-to-toe with the Yankees and the Dodgers, Los Angeles and New York. And I think that's a lot of people were looking forward to seeing that. Guys, if we can keep it in the Americas for a moment, let's talk about another sport that I think is gaining traction, not only in Ed's part of the world in Asia, but also in Europe. Obviously, the Europeans love the game of basketball, but it was the WNBA, the women's version of the NBA, that really caught fire this year with popularity. Caitlin Clark, she played her college basketball at small school, not small school, but a smaller school in the University of Iowa. And she tore it up there, leading her team to deep runs in the playoffs. And then she gets drafted by the Indiana squad, which had struggled prior to years of her coming there. And then all of a sudden, she becomes must-see TV, to the point where they had to move some of those Indiana games to different venues to accommodate the ticket requests. And so she becomes the person that is really the match that lights the fire for the WNBA and gets their attendance up, gets their viewership up, and she lives up to the billing. She wasn't getting paid Juan Soto money, but she got paid a lot of money with endorsement deals, because everyone wanted a piece of Caitlin Clark, almost to the point where she became a bit of a social icon, appearing on Saturday Night Live. And that's when you're getting into Taylor Swift stratosphere. But Caitlin Clark certainly raised the WNBA. And then in other basketball news, you have LeBron James, his son, Bronny James, getting drafted by the Lakers. Now, it was a bit controversial because a lot of people thought he wasn't good enough to get drafted. The only reason he got drafted by the LA Lakers was because his dad wanted him to be.
Let's turn our attention to Australia now, shall we? Because some huge events closed out the year down under. We should probably start with the NRL Grand Final, where the Penrith Panthers rammed home their status as Rugby League's greatest team in almost 60 years, claiming their fourth straight premiership with a 14-6 win over the Melbourne Storm. Now, the game was a rematch of the 2020 Grand Final, which was won by Melbourne, and it was pretty tense, actually. Penrith dominated possession and territory, only pulling away late on in front of a crowd of more than 80,000 at the Accor Stadium in Sydney. NRL is absolutely huge in Australia. And incredibly, the ball was in play for 33 of the opening 35 minutes. And I know, Nat, you know, obviously a lot about rugby being in your part of the world, maybe less so, Todd. But in rugby, generally, the ball gets kicked out into touch quite a lot. So to be in play for 33 of the first 35 minutes just goes to show how these are two of the best teams of the year in the world, really. I'm playing in Australia. A bit of controversy in the second half. Melbourne thought they'd got within touching distance of the Panthers when Jack Howarth went over in a crowded dash to the line. But as seems to be plaguing most sports these days, VAR made a call, the assistant referee, the video referee, and they claimed that the ball didn't touch the line. Penrith kept their advantage. TV replays later showing that the ball did actually ground, and it was a successfully grounding try, and it should have counted. But you know, when you're at home and you watch it on TV, you get a lot more angles, as they always say, than the video referee has the advantage of. So, you know, it is what it is. Penrith hung on. The win made them only the third team in history to win 4 straight premierships, the first since the great St. George side won 11 in a row from 1956 to 1966. So that was in October in Sydney. In November in Melbourne, the race that stops the nation. I went to school in Australia my last few years of high school, actually, and it really does stop the nation. At 11 o'clock in Perth, we all stopped lessons. for 10 minutes, sat in front of the TV to watch the Melbourne Cup. So the nickname is true and is valid, and I can justify that, yes, it really does stop at least school kids. So it was a nice kind of a break from actually doing any work for a bit. So the race was won by 90-1 outside at Knight's Choice with Irish jockey Robbie Dolan in the saddle. It was the 164th staging of the Great Race. It came down to a photo finish, in fact, between Knight's Choice and the Japanese horse Warp Speed, which was ridden by Akira Sugawara. He finished just behind in second. And the total prize money for the race, 8.56 million Australian dollars. That's a $150,000 increase from 2023. Big business in Australia is horse racing.
Wow. That is a story. But Robbie Dolan's story in itself is fascinating. He does come from a horse racing background. His father, Bobby, was a former jockey. His grandfather, likewise, as well. And even his uncle was a winner of the Irish Grand National. But did you know that he could have had a completely different career if his singing career took off? He was on The Voice Australia. He got down quite far into the competition. He was on Rita Ora's team. So Rita Ora famously pressed the button, turned around, liked what she saw, loved everything about him, picked him on the team, and got quite deep in that competition, which I find quite remarkable. But what a story he's now creating in the horse racing world. But a lot to live up to with a family that's indoctrinated into it, Todd.
Wow. So Rita's Choice on The Voice and then Knight's Choice in the Melbourne Cup.
Oh, brilliant, Ed.
How does the horse racing in Australia compare to, let's say, the Triple Crown in the U.S.? Is it big? Is it as well attended? You talk about them shutting down school and letting you guys watch it on TV. That's a good school, by the way. Is it that popular?
Yeah, unfortunately, we weren't allowed to place bets when we were in school. Well, maybe behind the bike sheds. It's huge in Australia. It's the third most attended spectator sport in Australia behind Australian rules football and rugby league. And on an international scale, actually, Australia has more race courses than any other nation. That's obviously because, they have a lot of space as well. It's second to the US in terms of the number of horses starting in races each year. And Australia is third after the US and Japan for the amount of prize money that's distributed in thoroughbred racing annually as well. So huge business. I dare say that a lot of the Australian breeders and a lot of Australian trainers actually ply their trade not just in Australia but throughout Asia as well, because it's a massive breeding ground for champion horses and studs who, in Asia we don't have as much space, but there are a lot of races that take place in Hong Kong, especially when you look at expat horse racing. So it's big business all around this region.
Likewise, it is over here in England and in the United Kingdom, because in terms of popularity, it's the third most popular sport behind football and rugby. You consider Cheltenham, I think they had over 230,000 people turning up this year to see Willie Mullins run away with it like he always does, which he did at the Grand National, which I think was about 150,000 or so, making their way up to Aintree. It's so popular over here. I mean, pretty much every week there's some race event up and down the land somewhere, and that's not just one race course, we're talking multiple race course events as well. What about in the United States then, Todd? What's it like over there?
Well, all I can say is we do not have the same dress code as you have at the Royal Ascot, which is actually one of those things I think everyone must do at one time. Go over and put a few quid on a horse and top hat and tails. But it's such a great event. Just a different kind of viewing vibe, I will say, in the States with the Triple Crown. But the Royal Ascot, I really think it's one of those things. I like to call it the British Grand Prix or the Triple Crown, where you've got the Royal Ascot, you've got Wimbledon, you've got Formula One. Just so many great sporting events in the summertime in Great Britain.
Yeah, I don't know about Royal Ascot, but at the Melbourne Cup, everyone starts off very glamorous in their hats and
that
tails.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, and then ends up lying in a bush with the hat somewhere else on the other side of the track. Let's wrap up sport in Asia, shall we, in 2024 with the 2024 Women's T20 World Cup, the 9th edition of that tournament. Now, it was originally scheduled to be hosted in Bangladesh. It was later relocated to the UAE due to political unrest in Bangladesh. So another big tournament that was held in the Middle East. 10 teams featured, including Scotland, who'd qualified for the first time, Australia, the defending champions, but they were defeated in the semis by South Africa. And ultimately, New Zealand would win their first title by defeating South Africa by 32 runs in the final. Now, New Zealand had lost the previous two finals that they were in back in 2009 and 2010. It was also the country's first T20 World Cup title at all in cricket, whether that's on the men's side or the women's side. And it came as a bit of a surprise, given that they lost 10 games in a row heading into the tournament. So I guess it's true what they say, form counts for nothing when it comes to major tournaments. It was a really monumental event as well. The ICC lifted the total prize pool for the 2024 edition to about $8 million US, more than double that of the 2023 edition. It meant that New Zealand walked away with $2.34 million as champions, a 134% increase from the $1 million that Australia won back in 2023. So New Zealand, I'm sure, enjoyed the fact that they ended up earning more than Australia. Really well watched over here as well. The World Cup was streamed on ICC TV for free to 116 territories in Afghanistan, continental Europe, the Pacific Islands, and Southeast Asia. And I think that is really what you need to spread the women's game, particularly in cricket in parts of the world where there might be little interest. Make it available for free, get people to watch it, get them into it, and then they'll continue to watch it for many years to come.
When they have that political unrest in one country and they have to move it to another country, how quick can they do that, and how much does that harm the attendance?
Yeah, good question, Todd. I mean, it is easier in this part of the world, because it's nice and dry, particularly in the Middle East in these desert conditions. So it's not like, when they had the cricket in the US and a lot of it got rained out. And they have all these pitches ready to go because they had the International League competition over there in the UAE. Obviously, if they needed to move it to Australia, you've got the IPL, you've got the Big Bash in Australia. So wherever you need to go in the region, there are enough cricket pitches ready to go.
Well, sometimes the end of a calendar year, of course, means we have to sometimes say goodbye to athletes. And in Europe, it's been pretty emotional on the tennis scene because we've had to say goodbye to Andy Murray and to Rafa Nadal as well, two of undoubtedly the greats of the game. And when you consider what Andy Murray has done for British tennis, it's just astronomical to have become the first man since Fred Perry to win Wimbledon like he did back in 2013. Just ended that sort of... monkey off his back and monkey off British tennis back, because it was there for so long. We had the hopes of Tim Henman, we had the hopes of Greg Rusedski as well during that sort of similar time. But it all came down to Andy Murray, and for him to have done that and achieved that, not once but twice at Wimbledon, and let's not forget also won the US Open as well. Pretty fantastic for British tennis, and hopefully has inspired more to come through. But not only was he the one to bow out, also the great Rafa Nadal. And we know, obviously, what an incredible career he had with 22 Grand Slam titles, 14 of those coming on his favoured surface of the clay of Roland Garros. I mean, these are two wonderful names, two fabulous sportsmen, Todd, that will be missed from the sport.
Yeah, no question, Natalie. And I think it's so close on the heels of Roger Federer retiring. So you have a huge exit of talent in a short amount of time. And I automatically think of, where do we go next? Who's next up? Who's the rising young talent? Obviously, Carlos Alcaraz, Yannick Sinner, Taylor Fritz, just to name a few. And on the women's side, it's a similar story. I think the Williams sisters are starting to ease out of the picture. Some talent is coming up there, but I think it'll be interesting to see who steps into those positions. That void fills that void, Edward, because there's so much tennis still to come. And there's definitely an appetite, obviously, for the Grand Slams.
Yeah, I've got to say, I am kind of glad that Rafael Nadal bowed out when he did, because I was at Roland Garros for the Olympics to watch him up against Novak Djokovic, and he was just a shadow of the player that he once was. And it was almost sad to see him so labored, trying to return those balls from Djokovic. And in a way, you just kind of wanted to see him being put out of his misery, and you don't want him to be remembered for the latter stages of his career. So great to see him go out. It is sad in a way, though, isn't it? When you look at Federer, you mentioned Federer, Todd, and Nadal as well. They didn't get to go out the way they wanted to.
Right.
Federer ended up retiring and making the announcement whilst he was at home. He didn't get to do one final Wimbledon and go out with that nice montage. Nadal also, he did the Olympics, but he didn't get to go out properly at a Roland Garros and say goodbye. Murray got a nice montage, a good send-off at Wimbledon. I do remember they prepared one for him. Was it the Australian Open I was at a couple of years prior?
Yes.
And then he's like, well, I haven't even confirmed I'm retiring yet. Why are you showing me this?
That was a big emotional goodbye, and he's just looking around thinking, hang on, what's going on here? But you're quite right. At Wimbledon, they did give him a send-off. He wasn't able to play in the singles, did opt to play in the doubles alongside his brother. They didn't venture very far, unfortunately, and was then meant to play in the mixed doubles with Emma Raducanu. And so we were hoping we were still going to get him one more time at Wimbledon. But unfortunately, Emma Raducanu had to pull out through injury because she was still involved in the singles as well. So had to concentrate on the singles. So unfortunately, we didn't get that big farewell that we were all hoping for, even though he still got a goodbye on the centre court. And we also obviously got to see him at Roland Garros, and wow, what a sort of run they had, him and Dan Evans, to the quarterfinals, saving I think 7 match points in 2 matches, something like that, which was quite incredible. So yes, in a way, he got his farewell, because what was also really lovely about the Andy Murray story is he'd made the point of saying he wanted to finish at the Olympics because he loved it so much. So it was lovely that he got to play out his final days as a tennis player out at Roland Garros. Unfortunately didn't come away with a medal, but still did really well with Dan Evans. But yeah, 2 players that I think will be missed. But Novak Djokovic still remains. He's the guy that's got to take on all these young guns. And interestingly, he's taken on Andy Murray as his coach for the Australian Open, which will be interesting to see how they work together. You know, when you consider all the injuries that Andy Murray has had in his latter part of his career, maybe that's part of what Novak Djokovic was thinking. That mentality that he might bring to me as an older player might be a benefit to me at the Australian Open.
Yeah, quite possibly. A very different temperament, I guess, in many ways in the box than Goran Ivanisevic before him. But yeah, it will be interesting to see how he goes in that. Perhaps we'll use that when we discuss the preview of next year. Can I just finish off, actually, before I forget, with Asian sport in 2024, the 2024 BWF World Tour Finals. They took place in Hangzhou from the 11th to the 15th of December, the final tournament of the BWF World Tour. A fantastic result for the hometown heroes. World number 1, Shi Yuqi, got the better of Anders Antonsen in the men's final to win his second World Tour Finals crown 6 years after his first. And it ended this recent Danish stranglehold on the tournament after those 3 consecutive triumphs for Victor Axelsen. And in the women's singles final, world number 2, Wang Ziyi, eventually got past compatriot Han Yue to add a maiden World Tour Finals title to her trophy cabinet as well. So badminton really, really big in China now, especially considering those wins, and great results for the hometown heroes because they also won in the mixed doubles as well.
Right, that is it for these 4 episodes. We've covered a lot of ground, but is there anything we're missing? Speak now or forever hold your peace. It's time for Any Other Business. Well, I'm going to take control of this one, if you don't mind, guys, just for now. I'm going to quickly talk about the F1 because we haven't even talked about who won the World Championship. Perhaps it's no surprise it was Max Verstappen who won his 4th title, which is pretty impressive. What was interesting about the F1 schedule this year, or certainly the competition this year, Max Verstappen has always been running away with it, hasn't he, of late? Right. But he won 4 of the first 5 races, and I think everybody just thought, oh, here we go again. F1's going to be boring. But actually, this time around, it wasn't as plain sailing for Max Verstappen. He had a fair bit of competition, and it went down, I think, to the penultimate race for him to win it in Las Vegas. So it wasn't all so easy for the from the man from Red Bull, but what was also interesting was the constructors, because it was McLaren that won the title for the first time since 1998, and they wrapped it up in Abu Dhabi. That one went down to the last race. So that kind of wraps things up with the F1. And if I quickly bring you to the tennis, because we always know there are the season finales, the WTA, that one was held in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and Coco Gauff won that one. And as for the ATP finals, well, it was the Italian Yannick Sinner who won in front of his home crowd in Turin, becoming the first Italian to win the title. He did it so in straight sets as well, as he beat the American Taylor Fritz. And we spoke more about the rise of Italian tennis in episode 1 of our review of 2024. So if you fancy listening into that, then head back to that. And you can find that on our feeds and on your podcast providers.
Well, speaking of any other business, Natalie, you got to talk about taking care of business. And Ruth Chepngetich of Kenya certainly did that. How about this? She ran a world record 2 hours and 9 minutes and 56 seconds to win the race at the Chicago Marathon. She took 2 minutes off the world record. That's 2 minutes off the world record. Became the first woman to beat the 2 hour, 10-minute mark. It was her 3rd Chicago Marathon victory. So, Ruth, congratulations. Tip of a cap to you. And we kind of come back to where we started last year in the review with the beginning of the NFL season. Obviously, the Kansas City Chiefs and Taylor Swift winning the Super Bowl. And they're on their way, it looks like, doing it again. Off to a great start this year with just one loss. But breaking news, Patrick Mahomes, their star quarterback, hurt his ankle over the weekend, their last game, a victory over the Cleveland Browns. He is what they call day-to-day. So we'll see if he can come back. But the Kansas City Chiefs look to be picking up right where they left off last year, Ed.
Yeah, we shall see if they make it to another Super Bowl. The big question, of course, if they do, will Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce still be together? That's probably the bigger question. That is it for this episode and indeed our review of sport in 2024. Make sure to subscribe to the show via your favorite podcast provider so you never miss an episode.
And next up, we'll be previewing 2025 and all the sports that's coming our way, from the South Asian Games to the UEFA Women's Euros, the Ryder Cup in New York, and much, much, much more.
Yeah, it's going to be your ultimate guide to sport in 2025. Until then, from Ed, Todd, and myself, and the whole of the This Sporting Planet team, thank you very much for listening.